Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to esteemed guests all over the world. My name is Ngọc Nguyen. I'm an Education Above All Youth advocate, and I'm honored to welcome you to our event, Youth, the Citizens of Change and Action for Peace, as part of the UNGA 75. Today's event is organized by Education Above All, Qatar Mission to the UN, and Search for Common Ground. Today, our team at EAA are delighted to be among youths, academics, executives, NGO, and government leaders who are as passionate about youth advocacy as we are. So September 9th, 2020 marked the first International Day to protect education from attack, calling for all sectors to unite to protect safe, quality, and inclusive education from disruption. EAA and its partners launched a global campaign to call to action for an inclusive approach to protecting education at all costs. This has highlighted the need for youth participation as change makers. Since its creation, youth have been a part of EAA and all of its programs, ensuring that youth are empowered to become active members of their community. In fact, one of my fellow youth advocates will be discussing how to ensure youth become positive change makers in today's panel. EAA understands that experts and decision makers alone are not enough to protect education and conflict and to work toward more prosperous, peaceful, and just futures. Youth understand their community's obstacles and challenges, hope and aspiration better than any of us, and as such, they are better equipped to create positive changes in their communities and beyond. During this session, we will hear exactly how youth from across the globe are making inspirational changes within their own communities, despite challenges they face on a daily basis. To kick off our event, I would like to invite Mr. Ahmed Al-Hindawi, Secretary General of the World Organization of the Scout Movement and former member of the UN Youth Envoy, to provide our first opening remark.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me, and would like at the outset to express my appreciation to the State of Qatar through the permanent mission to the United Nations and to Education Above All, and my friends at Search for Common Ground for convening this event. These are unusual times to all of us, very challenging indeed, and a different kind of UN General Assembly that we have just witnessed. But my huge appreciations to the co-conveners for insisting to have the youth agenda during this unusual session of the UN General Assembly. Reflecting on this moment of time, and I think we can all agree that even before the COVID-19 pandemic, young people globally were already confronted by barriers to accessing education, to quality education, facing high levels of unemployment, and a number of other significant challenges. One of them is the impact of conflicts and the inequalities that we're seeing in so many parts of the world. Now, the pandemic has compounded all these challenges and many more, leaving millions of young people unemployed, unable to access education, and facing severe physical and mental health issues. And in my view, this new reality threatens to delay the transition to adulthood. The youth era or the youth years in your life is marked with a number of transitions. That's a transition to adulthood, to independence, to higher education, to finding jobs. Now, all these transitions are being risked of significant delays as a result of this pandemic. We're witnessing today a generation in a lockdown, or a lockdown generation. And on top of that, we have a trust gap that is increasing between young people and institutions. More young people that they are feeling institutions have failed to respond to their needs and demands for change, delaying their transition to adulthood, and this economic independence and personal well-being that is deeply harmed as a result of policies, inequalities, on top of all, especially for young people who are suffering from conflicts or in conflict-affected areas. Now, in my view, this event and in the conversations we need to be having, we need to recognize that this generation of young people during this moment of time countering the pandemic is our key partner to win this battle. But also at the same time, young people are faced with some unrealistic choices. They are being asked either to sacrifice their lifestyle and stop the spread of the illness, or to allow the virus to continue to spread at the expense of their personal and economic interests and their ability to enjoy their youth and develop it throughout this time. I've seen young people who are not able to go to their schools or universities. And our call here, and that's not the call only of the World Organization of the Scout Movement, but also with us, a number of leading international organizations, we're calling all to recognize that the tough choices that young people are today are being asked to make. In fact, we need also to depart from this narrative of blame towards young people, instead actively engage them in shaping the pandemic response. They are not the problems. And similar to the discussion we had during the Youth, Peace and Security Agenda with the adoption of Resolution 2250, at that time, with our colleagues in search of common ground and for common ground, a number of other institutions, we were calling to change the narrative. So we didn't put the blame in young people and depart from looking at young people either as perpetrators of conflicts or victims, to look at them as peace builders and partners in this effort of securing peace and development. Now, a similar narrative is needed to be established today in this response to the pandemic. And part of that, I believe, it's up on all of us, institutions and the international community, to recognize the challenges faced by young people today and to come up with a bailout. I mean, we're seeing sectors today being bailed out, from the financial sectors, or looking at the airlines and tourism industries. And the biggest bailout of all times that we need today is a bailout for this generation of young people. We need a Marshall Plan kind of a bailout to recognize that this generation in a lockdown, this largest generation of young people, needs to be invested in, and they need to be prioritized in our ability to provide the investment needed to them. And I think they have made their voices loud and clear in their relation to wide range of issues, like climate change. We have seen how young people through youth movements have taken to the streets and brought the policymakers and decision takers also to recognize the urgency of climate actions, or the urgency for a need for more investment towards more green and inclusive recovery for following this pandemic. So my invitation to all today, that we need to continue listening to young people, but with that, we need to match their level of sacrifices that they're making today with a level of investment in this generation of young people. So once again, thank you very much for the co-conveners to bring this discussion during the agenda of the UN General Assembly. And my hope that we'll be able to step up our efforts in coming up with what we call a Marshall Plan style of bailout for this generation, this lockdown generation that deserves better opportunities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ahindawi. We certainly find ourselves at a very strange time, and we'll hear from youth advocates today. We can have a bailout plan for, as you said, for our whole generation. Next, we have Mr. Wadia Ait Hamza, the head of Global Paper Community at the World Economic Forum.
Thank you so much for having me, and apologies for the little technical glitch in not having my camera working today. I would like to recognize all the organizers and our friends in education, above all, the state of Qatar, Search for Common Ground, for convening all of us to discuss this important issue that is really crucial, especially at this moment. You know, everyone knows that this year has been a time of unprecedented uncertainty amid the global spread of the coronavirus pandemic. Nevertheless, the one thing that is refreshing, or that is everyone agrees on at this special time, is that the role of youth proved as vital during this crisis as ever. We've seen that youth have been at the front scene of resolving the pandemic, helping the local communities, either through being the paramedics or in the medics or in the authorities. Young have been at the heart of this pandemic. But also, despite of the significant challenges that the COVID-19 pandemic has presented, the youth has found new ways to fulfill its passion, engagement, and commitment to solve world issues. As we know, climate change is not waiting or is pausing because of COVID-19. Unemployment is not pausing because of COVID-19. And youth have shown that commitment to other issues in parallel to even supporting and helping with the COVID-19 pandemic. And that has a big effect on the mental health, which is not discussed at many levels. what's the result of this pandemic on the mental health of young people, of kids that are not going to school, of kids that are being put in full confinement in some countries and regions, and that has a big effect. We know that COVID-19 has disrupted lives, communities, and businesses worldwide, and it becomes that clear that all stakeholders, especially young people, must urgently come together so that we can minimize this impact on public health, but also on the socioeconomics of the society. We know, all of us, that the system where we live today is not working. We need to think of a great reset. We need to reset a system where we think of how can we make sure that no one is left behind. We need to think of how can we make sure that we have equity and inclusion and solve all the societal problems. And we've seen the biggest social movement of our times with Black Lives Matter, and how the pandemic exacerbated this social injustice. We've seen and we've talked, and we still need to talk about climate change and how youth are working tirelessly to catalyze action on climate and protecting the environment. I'm talking to you from Geneva, Switzerland this past week, have been really tense in terms of how youth have been talking about climate change. We need also to talk about the future of work and education. We know that today 60% of the kids that are starting school now will do jobs that don't exist today. So how can we think about the actual system of education knowing that it's leading nowhere? And above all, how can we prepare and be ready for the fourth industrial revolution? It's an opportunity, and the experts are saying that the fourth industrial revolution will destroy more than 75 million jobs, but it will create 133 million jobs. So in which side we want to be, the 75 million or the 133 million? And this pandemic came into a moment where we really need to change this narrative that the youth are the problem into the youth are part of the solution, and they need to be on the table where the decisions are being made. And thank you for putting the youth agenda on this on the sides of the UN General Assembly and the anniversary of the United Nations. It's been 75 years that the United Nations has created, and I join my voice to many voices that say the UN is not in crisis. The UN is in transformation, and it's time to transform it to include more youth and around the table. And my last point is that we all here are talking about this topic, and we are privileged because we are connected. We have internet, we have electricity, so we are kind of privileged in being able to be in this table or create our table. And that privilege, we should not be ashamed of it, but we should be ashamed if we don't use it for a purpose. And our purpose today is to make sure that no one is left behind. And thank you again for all the organizers for convening all of us today to discuss this very important issue.
Thank you, Mr. Hamza, for your important call to action. We're certainly very privileged to be here, and the pandemic has made us question whether our existing system is sustainable. So we hope that this will bring some ideas into this conversation. Lastly, I'd like to invite Dr. Maleha Malik from EAA to give the final opening remark. She's the director of EAA's Protect Education in Security and Conflict program.
First and foremost, I want to say that at EAA, we're absolutely across our 4 programs, which is Educate a Child, Protect Education, which I direct, and Al Fakhura. We're making strategic intervention. Priority for us is to support young people for all the reasons we've just heard. We know that the COVID pandemic will make the situation of young people much worse, and I think it's absolutely incumbent on us to intervene. At Protect Education, Security and Conflict, our focus is on protection of education from attack during conflict for the world's most marginalized people. And if COVID has had a ravaging effect on many people, it's going to have an absolutely tragic consequence for the people who are at the forefront of the work that I do. And in relation to these people, the strategic interventions that we need across the board include not only issues around provision of training, provision of resources, whether it's health and whether it's employment. It also requires asking young people to imagine themselves as being right bearers. It requires us to intervene to make sure that young people have dignity, they have agency to speak for themselves rather than us speaking for them. And that's why I want to end my remarks by saying an absolutely core part of what we're committed to at EAA is not only global advocacy of speaking to young people, it's grassroots interventions that allow young people to have the absolute core training and skills to speak for themselves, to be advocates for change, and in the case of my program, to speak out in defense of the protection of the right to education. So I thank each and every one of you for supporting our mandate, for giving voice to young people. And what we can, each of us, do is to continue with this commitment. EAA doesn't just want to have a one-off intervention. We've launched a campaign called Unite to Protect. And I just want to end by thanking each and every one of you and inviting you to join with us to protect education from attack and to empower young people. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Malik, for your remark. So thank you, Mr. Ahmed Ahindawi, Mr. Wadia Ait Hamza, and Dr. Malaya Malik. Before our panel begins, please direct your attention to the following messages from youth at the EAA 2020 Empower Conference. The virtual Empower 2020 conference aims to build awareness, knowledge, and skills related to youth mobilization and inclusion, peace, and security.
LGBTQIA+ people and other marginalized groups, and that the role of youth in peace processes goes beyond observers or advisors to being key influencers and decision makers.
It's really a great initiative for the youth in Qatar and in all the Arab countries who come together with this idea. Talking about climate change and insecurity is really a reality. Our leaders announced that there would be holidays for 3 days, again for 5 days, 10 days, but this is not the solution. Our leaders are just busy in blaming each other instead of finding a long-term solution. They are just telling the speech, they are not doing any action. I want our world leaders to do more action. Otherwise, our future and our planet will be dying soon.
As I mentioned earlier, was established during the early stages of the bid for Qatar for the World Cup 2022, almost about 10 years ago in 2010. And the idea behind Generation Amazing was that it is a social and human legacy program that positively impacts the lives of many disadvantaged youth.
And so what I usually suggest is to focus on making a change. So really kind of define whatever kind of change you want to make in the world, and then set that as your objective, instead of setting your objective to defeat this other side.
For strategies, you need to understand that, I mean, the globe is changing. We all understand right now about 2019 and 2020 is quite different from what's happened with the COVID-19. So as much as the world is dynamic, as much there is changes in the world, be dynamic.
Thank you. I will now hand it over to Mr. Solvi Carson, Program Manager at Search for Common Ground's Children and Youth Division, to kick off our main panel discussion. Mr. Carson has been working on the youth, peace, and security agenda since he was himself a youth advocate, advocating for what became the UNSCR 2250. Please welcome Mr. Carson, moderating today's panel discussion, featuring young leaders from around the world to discuss key values and tools for youth to become positive change makers for peace.
Thank you. Exciting. And thanks to all the speakers for the opening remarks. What a great start. It's been amazing to see how far we've come in the last few years in recognizing young people's importance really as leaders of social change and building peaceful societies from the ground up around the world. As Nok mentioned, I used to be a youth activist advocating for this recognition, and now that I'm not so young anymore, I'm really honored to get to facilitate a session like this, featuring some incredibly inspiring speakers, young speakers from around the world: Noor, Shogi, Madalena, Nuria, Regine, and Irene. 6 young people who are all driving change in different ways in their communities, in their organizations, internationally, different ways, in different forms around the world. They bring to us a lot of different experiences, ideas, perspectives, and I think together they can teach us a lot. To kick off today's discussion, I would like to ask each of them to tell us a little bit about their work as a young person, as young people, taking action for peace, for social change. Who's involved in the work and what achievements have you had? I'm going to introduce each panelist just as they take the floor, and I invite the panelists to unmute and turn on their cameras when they speak. So I want to invite our first speaker to start off the discussion, and our first speaker is Noor Shiban. Noor is a student with Education Above All's Al Fakhura program, and as a young Syrian refugee in Lebanon, she's worked on civic engagement and relationships between refugees and host communities, but I'm not going to spend too much time talking about her work because I'm going to ask her to talk about it herself. So over to you, Noor.
Hello, this is Noor. I hope you're doing well. Okay, I'll start explaining what my situation here and what obstacles I faced and how I overcame them, especially in the current pandemic we are passing through globally and locally. To be called a refugee is the opposite of an insult. It is a badge of strength, courage, and victory. That was said by Tennis Office for Refugees. Me and many Syrian youth lost peace since we were displaced by force from our home because of the current war. We struggled to survive in the new communities. The lack of peace made us eager to create our own peace, safety, and security out of our home shelter. This journey is not easy at all. Yet our hunger for peace gives us the strength to overcome the unlimited obstacles we face. Here are some of the difficulties we face. First, we, the Syrian refugees, are excluded and banned from basic human rights in the communities. The law prevents us from work at Lebanese associations, so we have to work hard for long hours and for low wage since we support our families financially. In some cases, refugees maltreated by the host community. These obstacles encourage the Syrian youth to work hard to change this reality and enhance the conditions for the refugees. And we will explain how to make these changes. First, youth naturally are characterized by creativity, strength, and perseverance, which are the basic elements for positive change in societies. For example, in the current crisis in Lebanon, we people faced the economical decay and the explosion was a disaster which ruined the country more. Syrian academic refugees constituted teams in Beirut to help in removing the ruins in the affected areas, support the affected people there. Second, we youth work effectively to show that refugees are qualified. However, we need support to show our qualities, precisely educational support. For me, I came to Lebanon with nothing at all. I was totally drained and I had no dream, neither energy to survive. Later, I applied for Laser and Spark Scholarship in Lebanon to continue my undergraduate study. I finished with BA in teaching English as a second language at LIU, Lebanese International University. Meanwhile, I felt drained, exhausted, and weary. Nevertheless, I have not given up my dream to continue. I was supported by my academic community of colleagues and instructors. I did it, and I'm seeking for a scholarship for master's studies now. Now I feel qualified to make changes in the society in many ways. I do support refugees in my society educationally. Also, I created a source of inspiration for those who are drained and desperate. I can tell how much I struggled to be here in this situation, but I did it. I spread my belief that refugees are worthy, enough, and victorious when the appropriate support is provided. I'd like to conclude my speech with Amela Kolodar saying, "A refugee is someone who survived and who can create the future." Thank you.
Thank you, Noor. Thank you for your strength, and thank you for sharing it with us, and thank you for inspiring us with your work. I want to turn over to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Shogi Ahmed, who originally comes from Sudan, but currently works with the Place Network in Paris, unlocking the hidden opportunities of newcomer talent in Europe. And he's also an education, above all, youth advocate. So Shogi, the floor is yours to tell us about your work and the impact that it's had.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening for everyone. So as Mr. Carlson has already introduced me, my name is Shogi Ahmed, and Sudanese originally, and right now I'm based in Paris, working with Place Network, which is a startup that works mainly on integrating, professionally integrating newcomers who have accruable and adequate talents in the ecosystem here in France. Now, when we talk about, I'm just going to move a bit and talk about the topic of today, which is peace, youth, and security. Most of us, whenever we talk about these topics, we take for granted our understanding around these topics. And for me personally, I'm just wanted to share with you with all the experiences that I had throughout the last years with my humble experiences. Peace is a word, is a concept where people can misunderstand it in a lot of ways. Coming from a country like Sudan, and we all know that the opposite mainly of peace is conflict. Sudan was always related to this topic, which is whenever I go, for example, outside of my country, I was challenged whenever you ask a person, so I know about what you know about my country, for example, you know about what the conflict, I know about it, which is like there is the genocides, which is all about the related to the negative things. And there that was exactly the moment where I figured out that this is why I should work on this field. This is where I found my passion around the YPS agendas. And also relating it to another part, which is the youth. Knowing that youth right now, especially in a continent that I belong for, which is Africa, has more than 66% of the population of Africa right now are just from our youth between 18 to 35, which puts us in a question. So within all that, and how are we still lacking a lot of development, a lot of major elements for our lives so far? And that's where I come the fact that I felt that there is a need to work on that. And for that, I started like almost 6 or 7 years ago, volunteering and working within that aspect with 3 different levels, which is education, peace building, and conflict transformation. And within that, I'm usually using skills around using arts and culture as a tool to reach peace and also to convey messages to the local communities. Because again, peace is not just some sort of a privilege for certain people. It has to include. This is the message of peace, because peace is around diversity. I mean, the way how you see peace is not, of course, it differs from a place to another, but the most important element is to make sure that it's inclusive as it is. And within that also, I grew my capacities and capabilities around peace, where I found that, for example, that there is a huge lack when it comes to organizations, especially humanitarian organizations in conflict zones, when it comes to address peace, because there is a special project or special classical modules around that. And I felt that innovation can be like, we need to innovate within that. And luckily, I started like a year ago my master's degree here in one of the universities here in Paris, which is around innovation and technology management, which is how can you use innovation and technology management in a way that can create social impact for refugees, for migrants, for indigenous people in the future, and how we can use education and so on. I'm also so lucky and privileged to be part of Education Above All Youth Advocates, which is a program that mainly works on that field and around advocating for people who are marginalized groups, people who are like really dealing with a lot of societal issues and problems. And that's mainly who am I, and looking forward to hear from the others.
Thank you, Shogi. It's wonderful to hear the passion with which you speak, and I think that triangle of education, peace building, and conflict transformation, it's a powerful triangle. This point you make about inclusion as well. I mean, we talk about youth and peace and security, but then the question of which youth are we talking about? All youth. It's big discussions that I hope we can continue having. But I want to turn over now to our next speaker, Magdalena. I don't know if you are able to turn on your camera. At least I don't see you. I think you are there on the line. Magdalena Nandege, I hope I pronounce your name correctly. You're there, brilliant. So she's part of the Whittaker Peace and Development Initiative and has been, as a consequence of her work with the initiative, has been leading some really interesting mediation efforts in her own community. So Magdalena, can you tell us a bit about your work and the impact that you've had with your work?
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to say thank you very much for this opportunity that you've given me. My name is Nandege Magdalene from South Sudan, and I'm very glad to be part of the panel for the discussion. What I would like to talk about Whittaker Peace and Development is that we have so far done a lot of activities concerning peace dialogue and mediation. Like, for example, the mediation that took place in 2019, that is between the Didinga and the Logir. And we also did community dialogues within our own communities here, like it has been done in Wow, it has been done in Torit, it has been done in Bentiu. These are some of the activities that young people have been involved in, and which has really brought a lot of impact to the community. Like, our communities used to have the issue of cattle raiding, whereby they're doing stealing of cattle from one place to another between two tribes. But since we did the dialogue and we tried to consult, trying to really bring peace between the two communities, we have seen that there is no child abduction that has been taking place since by then. But with the issue of COVID-19 currently, we have really had a lot of challenge with the issue of gender-based violence in the community. So this has been challenging, and the young people within the community also have been involved in the
Magdalena, I think we can't hear you anymore. Or at least I can't hear you. If you're still there, hopefully we can bring you back. Oh, you are there.
On preventive measures and awareness on COVID.
I think, Magdalena, that you might be having some difficulties with your connection, which is a shame because it was really interesting to listen to you. And I hope that we can maybe come back to you if your connection improves. It's really amazing to hear about how your dialogue and your ability to create dialogue has actually created like real, meaningful, very like clearly visible change for peace. Magdalena, if you're back, we didn't hear you for a few minutes. Do you want to wrap up? You were just mentioning the effects of COVID when we stopped being able to hear you. So Magdalena, if you are there and if your microphone is working again, then you can go ahead and wrap up what you were sharing with us before.
Yeah, we really say that the UN should give chance to the youth to get involved in this decision making and to also be involved in the constitution of the world, and they should be having seats in the UN also where they can contribute to the young people and support the young people. And we really urge the communities to help the young people in all the communities, especially the vulnerable communities and conflict affected areas. And with the issue of education and peace, it's really important that we should involve young people because they're still energetic and they can contribute a lot to the country, because we are really for protection, we are for unity, we want to really see change among the youth. So this is an opportunity where we can engage youth so that they cannot have the issue of unemployment. So with this event is really, our voices should be listened out there by the people who are making the constitution, by the leaders of our countries. They should really see ways of how to engage youth in different levels of activities that can really transform youth in many different ways. This is what I can wrap up and talk about.
Thank you, Magdalena. I really appreciate it. Always with these online events, the technology, you never know how it goes. I'm really glad that we were able to get you back. The next panelist that we have is Nuria Caracolova. I hope I'm saying your last name correctly.
Yes.
Caracolova. Thank you. So Nuria works for Search for Common Ground, the same organization as I work for, but Nuria works for Search for Common Ground in Kyrgyzstan, where she coordinates the countrywide program Jashtan, which means land of youth or country of youth. I'm not sure I translated perfectly, but I hope it gets the meaning across. So Nuria, do you want to tell us a bit about the work that you've been doing and the impact that it's had?
Sure, but first let me express my deepest gratitude to the organizers for inviting me. I'm super happy to be here with all of you. And related to your question, I would like to mention two things. First, what we do here in Kyrgyzstan is we work with vulnerable young people, and I know when it comes to the concept of vulnerable young people is a really tricky question, and it's really hard to kind of unpack this word and this concept. But however, we were able to develop three categories with whom we work. We work with relatives of young relatives of those who were convicted for the extremism or who are in a combat zone. The second category is the children of labor migrants who left behind by their parents. And the third category is youth who are in a police watch list for committing a crime. So we're trying to transform them from being part of the problem to the peace leaders through the different approaches. And our approaches and mechanisms like really diverse. It's starting from the capacity building trainings like use conflict mapping exercises and ending with the intervention at the psychological level. That's the first thing that I would like to share. And the second is that in our journey, we faced the problem of youth frustration and it's not a news for all of us, I guess. We have realized that it is really essential not working only with young people, but work more on creating an enabling and supportive environment for them at 3 levels. It's a family level, school level, and community level. And so basically all these key actors who work in these 3 levels, they're engaged with young people, but rarely with each other. And through linking their efforts, through linking them with each other, we were able to create an integrated supportive environment for young people. And now we see the great results of it when, for instance, the local government provide an opportunity to those transformed young people to open their youth centers, and the local government allocated the budget to implement their state youth action plans. So it means that our youth are engaged not only like civically, but at the state level as well, which is great. So yeah, that I will be trying to to be short. That's the thing that I would like to share for now.
Thank you, Nuria. It's wonderful to hear from you always, and such an exciting program that you're working on, and the point that you make about connecting the work that's going on with youth with the work that's going on actually with other groups in society. That's so important. I also think it's brilliant to hear from you as a young person yourself who is shaping how an organization like Search for Common Ground, which is not a youth-led organization, works with young people. And I think that's also so important, the work that you do in that. Now I want to open the floor for our next speaker, or turn the floor over to our next speaker, Regine Guevara, who comes from the Philippines and who has been a really important voice for youth in Southeast Asia, but also more broadly within the Asia Pacific region. She's a co-founder of the Asian Youth Peace Network, and she's also the Asean Youth Representative to the UN Interagency Network on Youth Development, and a lot of other things besides, which I couldn't even try to list here in sort of a short introduction. So, Regine, I turn the floor over to you to tell us about yourself and the work that you do.
Thank you so much for such a warm welcome. It's so good to get together with all of you. Thank you to the organizers, Search, EA Foundation, Qatar, for having me again. I think it's quite amazing. Let me start by saying it's quite amazing that we're coming together from different walks of life, different regions, but with such a unifying topic, basic education. And if anything, I feel like COVID-19 teaches us what it means to be human, like how similar we really all are, but at the same time, how different we still experience these similar experiences, So I believe education is a crucial tool for us to understand our similarities and our differences, so then we can identify our shared responsibilities. That being said, I think that we need to maybe push this discussion a little bit further from a question on why to how. So how do we educate? How do we teach solidarity while acknowledging that the world is not equal, that there really are people left behind, there are people who are not on the table, and there are, of course, stakeholders that need to be accountable. So it's more like just putting things into perspective with multiple lenses. So while talking about something as basic and like a social need like education, like we try to maintain a political lens, an economic lens, and look at it as like we're youth, but we're part of like larger structures. So access to education is just the first step, but after that, we need to talk about representation, diversity, and inclusion policies in educational systems. So that's what I want to talk about in the next 5 minutes. In the Philippines, we have 7,107 islands, and each island, more or less, has its own language or dialect. So you can imagine how diverse our nation is. And not only that, but every major colonizer during the last World War passed through our archipelago. So there are multiple layers of diversity, and inclusion in our nation. So we can't stress enough the importance of participation, and young people through the years have been quite successful at that. Like over here, we elect our youth leaders at the village level. So from the village level, we elect youth leaders, and then they come together at the city level, and they come together at the national level. And through such mechanisms, we're able to encourage young people to educate each other, like educate our peers about the diversity of our experiences, our sociocultural experiences, and hopefully be able to recognize that there are certain histories unwritten in our books, maybe even experiences of some tribes, of some communities that are not discussed in the classrooms, and even identities that are marginalized in student and teacher quotas. So I guess apart from that, like I just had to touch on that like content point briefly, but the next question is always sustainability, right? Like young people are doing a lot on the ground, but how do we support them so that they become sustainable? There are many young people who are on the front lines of policy reform, but of course we need more support. And at the regional level, we are quite fortunate to have some participatory mechanisms as well. So we have the Committee for Asean Youth Cooperation, where the youth councils from the local national come together at the regional level, and they are hosted at what we call the International Youth Center in Malaysia. So it's under the patronage of the Ministry of Youth and Sports in Malaysia. And recently, like just last International Day of Peace, we launched what we call the IYC for Peace. So it's a youth-led movement where we encourage the center and then the corresponding partners like youth councils, more like institutions and young people in decision-making spaces to bridge the gaps in their youth peace programming. Because really in a region that is so diverse like Asia, I think we're probably the most, if not one of the most diverse regions in the world. What we need is a horizontal platform to exchange best practices and experiences, not only in formal education, but in informal education, because many times in formal education, policy reform takes a long time to ensure that diversity and inclusion is in place. So we need to start from educating each other at the grassroots, and hopefully it trickles down to the national level. I guess that's it. Like I would end there, but also just try to sum up by saying that that it's important to look at this lens of diversity and inclusion in education, because in the peace building world, we learned that freedom and occupation, terrorism, liberation, these words, they mean different things for different people. That's exactly why there's conflict. So education has a responsibility to ensure that we do not only integrate the minority voice to the majority, and that we truly represent diverse communities' narratives. Thank you.
Thank you, Regine, for such a rich and super interesting reflection. A lot of really interesting things that you said, but one of the things that really stayed with me from what you said was you mentioned trickling down from the grassroots. I think usually when people are talking about trickling down, they talk about trickling down from some high up ivory tower down to the grassroots. I really like the way you've turned the flow around. I think that's a great way to think about it. Our final panelist today is Irene Amayiri, and I must admit that again, I hope that I'm pronouncing your name correctly, but probably not. She is Irene is the Humanitarian Affairs Global Focal Point for the major group on children and youth, which is one of the most important channels for youth participation, or child and youth participation, sort of at the top of the UN system, if you like. But she's also working on youth leadership for Generations for Peace. And well, Irene, I'll turn it over to you to tell us about all the work that you've been doing and the impact that it's been.
Yeah, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good evening. Actually, I hope all is well and you are keeping safe. This is Irene Amayiri from Jordan, and I'm a global focal point with UNGA and working with Generations for Peace as a program coordinator in Jordan. Actually, it's my pleasure to meet you all. Basically, I have two different experience with UNMGCY at the regional level and the global level. So actually, my journey with UNMGCY start as a regional focal point with MENA region. Basically, UNGCY facilitated my engagement with decision making in design, implementing, following up, reviewing, monitoring and evaluation the policy, the sustainable policy in all the level. So maybe now the big question: how UNGCY as a structure mobilize youth and their voice for the agenda of the peace and security. Actually, UNGCY give me as a regional focal point, safe space to engage more and to push up the agenda of the peace and just societies. Basically, through the present, I'll talk about the challenges and opportunity of youth in the MENA, facing the youth in the MENA region in the ECOSOC, in the annual meeting of the ECOSOC in the Geneva in the last year. So actually, this is what we need, is participation in the decision-making process, and we do it through the UNGCY UNGCY structure. So now, as a global focal point with UNGCY, actually, I have I'm fully responsible through UNGCY to participate in the compact of the young people and also lead 11 regional focal points from the different regions. So actually, this is a more important point for me to engage me more, to know about the challenges, to help other people, young people, to push also the young people to participation in the mobilize the youth in the agenda for the peace. And also it's more important to sharing what the youth need with compact member, also with annual meeting. And also maybe I want to share the last one point. UNGCY gives me also the opportunity or the space to engage with international organization, governmental, non-governmental, with a compact member to support policy and programmatic efforts of youth, peace, and security. You can hear me or no?
Yes,
because
I can hear you. Yes.
Now. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Irene. Thank you for sharing your experiences. And MCGY, it's such an interesting structure for youth participation, youth voice in spaces where we don't necessarily always expect it to be present. So thanks for telling us about that. And thank you to all the speakers for being careful with time. I know there was so much for everybody to share because you've all been doing so amazing things. Before we wrap up the discussion today, I want again to go around to all of our speakers, and I want to make use of the fact that in the audience today we have a lot of people representing different parts of the so-called international community, and so I want to use this chance, as they are all here listening to you, hearing your experiences, and I want to ask you to very quickly, in 1 minute, share with them a reflection where you look ahead and think about one thing that you would like to ask the people in our audience today to do so that they can amplify the impact of young people like yourselves. So I want to just go around quickly to ask all of our panelists to answer this question, or just to share one thing that they'd like our audience today to do to amplify their impact, to amplify your impact. And so let's just, I suggest we just go through our panelists in the same order as we did before. So I want to invite Noor, if you want to just share first your reflections, and then we'll go around the same way as we did earlier.
Of course, for sure. For me, I want to tell each human being in this globe that you are worthy, you are enough, You are qualified and you can make your victory. First, never allow the conditions to manipulate your life. We are the one who can manipulate the conditions and create the appropriate atmosphere to grow up our dreams and reach self-actualization, which is a basic tool of inner peace. Then we have to believe in ourselves, our qualities, and our ability to improve ourselves and our community as well. The moment we reach inner peace, we will be able to spread peace in our community, society, and country, and all around the globe. We have to create our own milieu of peace and success, so we can provide the world with the needed and quite enough peace. We have to surround ourselves with successful people who are aiming to achieve peace and success and enhance human life basically. Thank you.
Thank you, Noor. That was really inspiring. Shogi, over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Carlson. For me, I'm just gonna say it clearly. It will always be hard to deal with, especially as a youngsters, as people who believe in youth development. It will never be easy. When we're talking about governments, we're talking about systems, when we're talking about doctrines itself, it will always be hard to deal with. The most important thing that we all need to keep in our heads is that we need to be eager to change. And by that, I don't mean just like systems itself that will be changed by itself. You start by yourself. There's a lot of people, like from our panelists today, were speaking about conveying messages, you change, and so on. You need to start by yourself, because you need to be the example that you need to showcase to the other people. So rather than just asking people to change, start by yourself. Be eager to know, exceed your limits. If it's hard, no problem. That's what we call it, challenging. That's the age that you need to be challenged. So keep that in your mind. Also, when it comes to as I did, which is, I think, the level of evolution that we had, like, I'm just imagining right now, I'm just bringing this out of nowhere, like 100 years ago, let's not even 100, like 50 years ago, if you ask me that we are in a panel where right now 5 women are talking and 2 male, this is not something that was an optional, not in any place in the world. We showcase that we are changing, we are going there, which is good, which is really, really good. However, we need to keep that energy on. We need to make sure that inclusivity, diversity, peace and security, all these items need to be embedded and included in everyone. And last thing, which is the word about youth itself, where, like Carlson has mentioned something interesting, which is that he has passed the youth age. Youth, like, you are youngsters. Everyone is a youngster. It is this spirit that you have in your head and in your heart around the topics and the way how you address things. So keep it up. You are a youngster, Carlson. I'm just trying to tell you that. And keep it up, guys. And that's it.
Thank you, Shogi. Moving moving on. Magdalena, do you want to go next and share your one final thought?
Hello, everyone. My word to all the youth around the world is that the youth should really be focused, and when you're given a responsibility, you should really be committed in what you're doing in order to support your own communities. We should have the sense of belonging, the sense of unity, the sense of diversity to support our government, to support our communities in whatever activity and responsibility that you've been given to. And we should work together to move. We should have a social movement that we can bring up the younger ones. We should be an example to the others who are still coming up, like, in order for us to improve on our community, especially with conflict affected areas. Those who have the knowledge and the skills should really stand strong to fight violence in the community, and should have inclusivity, especially with the issue of gender mainstreaming, whereby the ladies and the gentlemen are all involved in all kind of activities that they are doing in their communities. Active participation. Women should really get involved in most of the activities that they are doing in governance, in decision making. We really encourage that the female should take a move in such kind of activities where they can really support their families, because as a woman, you have a very big responsibility, and you, at the end of the time, or as we are growing up, you also become a parent. So you should be a responsible person that can be an example to the rest of the young people in the community.
Thank you,
And thank
Magdalena. So I was just saying thank you to Magdalena, and I was going to suggest that Nuria, if you want to share with us your one call, one request to the people in the audience today, go ahead.
So let me first share quickly about one concern. I would like to share my concern, and then I will go to the recommendation follow us. So what I see now on the ground is that the youth activists, youth-oriented NGOs. So we work, I mean, we're engaged with young people, but we rarely engage with each other. And like taking into the account the agenda on what we work, like youth, peace and security, is always really tricky, and it's conflict sensitive, and we should keep in mind the do no harm approach always, like every day, every moment. And what I would like to suggest is like maybe we should more think about the creating a good condition for all of us to cooperate more, to foster partnership between us, and so we can learn from us, more, and we will avoid those like doubling work and the same mistake that we can make in the future. So just fostering partnership between us, I guess, it's one of the important things as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Nuria. Regine, do you want to go ahead next?
Yes. I want to end by quoting Peter Pan. There's a quote that says, all children grow up except one. And I can dissect that. I can dig deeper into that quote. Okay, watch me. So I can dissect that by saying that on one hand, we are not youth forever. So beyond youth, we need to see ourselves as part of a generation. So we're not just youth, but we're part of a generation where we're also part of structures of injustice, and then it's up to us to see until what extent will we be inheriting and disinheriting all these structures. And I think that I really echo with what Nuria said, that it starts with us to break the silos and work with each other, youth who are in decision-making spaces, who have access to resources, and then young people who are on the ground in the grassroots. We need to stop the culture of competition among organizations and even peace builders. And hopefully it starts with our generation. And on another hand, we can also be youth forever in a sense, because education never ends. It's an evolutionary process. Even older people, they continue to learn. And especially among us, because youth are not homogenous and we're ever transitory. So we need to constantly engage in dialogue and consultations and be open to learning from different types of people and different identities, basically, so that again it goes back to the earlier point that we don't inherit the inequity, and we don't reinforce the inequity of the previous generations.
Thank you, Regine. So you're also inspiring. Our final thought goes to Irene. What do you want to share with our audience today? What one request you want to today? What one request?
Okay, so thank you so much for your important question. So actually, this is not my opinion. Actually, this is what the youth asking. We need for an April partnership between youth and UN systems, civil society, governmental and non-governmental member, also with international organizations, just to provide them with equal or with real opportunity, and also to give them the real or the access to decision makers. So that's it
Thank
from
you,
my
Irene.
side. I think it's more important at this point. Yeah.
No, thank you, really. And thank you, all of you. I feel so inspired. I feel like I've learned so much today. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm really feeling like I wish we had like 3 hours for this instead of 1 hour. But this is how it is. So we've come to the end of our time. Thanks so much for everything that you've shared, everything that everything that you've taught us about your work, about your ideas, about your impact. To wrap up today's session, I give the floor back to Nok, and just want to say from my side, thanks so much for having let me be a part of this. It's been amazing.
Thank you to all of our panelists, and thank you, Sylvie, for your moderation. I think coming from the perspective of an audience member and a fellow youth advocate, I feel empowered and connected to our panelists. And thank you so much for taking your time to share your stories, your works, and your ideas with everyone around the world. So to conclude our event, we're showing you a video about Art Solution, our partner, an NGO that shows the power that youth can bring and the need to equip youth with capacities to make changes.
So we're here with our partners, Art Solution, in the BDBD refugee settlement, and we're working with them on an art project that hopefully can provide them with the tools and the understanding of different values like human rights, the rights to education, global citizenship, and this is all in line with the program under Education Above All to protect education and insecurity and conflict.
Education Above All had a delegation that came to this project for 3 days where they really introduced a lot of ideas about human rights and about peace building. And what was really incredible to see is the local artists taking these ideas and really contextualizing it, because what matters is to take a concept like freedom of speech or freedom in education and taking that and putting it in the local context so that it makes sense and so that it's important for the young people that we're working with.
So the canvas is an exchange mural and it's going to go around the world to different communities, different vulnerable communities, to exchange artwork and ideas that they share in terms of human rights or the rights to education. And it's really having an impact on the communities. You can see them changing for the better.
When I keep drawing it, I will just feel happy. I will not think of what had happened.
My hopes and expectations for this project are really that the artists take their skills and their passion for the community and be able to transfer that to these kinds of projects that focus on public art and working with the youth. For the children who are involved, my hope for them is to have a sense through this project that they have a voice, that they have a story, and that people really are going to pay attention to what they have to say.
Today, our panelists have demonstrated how youth are crucial initiators of ideas, they're creators of solutions, and contributors to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And the fact that we can convene together today, despite a global pandemic, shows the power of our global community. I hope today, after today's talk, we can all take something away from it and think about how we can profoundly engage with youth in our own communities. We have to place youth at the heart of our programs and efforts and empower them to advocate for a more peaceful and equitable world. Thank you and goodbye.